Hi, today we are going to be talking about decimals, their categories, and how to read numbers. So this is the decimal board. And if you notice, the first thing is that the unit has a circle around it. That is because it is the most important digit. Everything is based on the unit. The second thing you might notice is that there's this very thick black line right here. This represents the decimal point, or the little dot that you see after numbers. And what that does is it separates the whole numbers from the pieces of numbers. So let's get started. This is a unit. When I have 10 units, I have a 10. But if I were to take this unit and to break it up into 10 pieces, I would have a tenth. If I have 100 units, I have 100. But if I take a unit and cut it up into 100 pieces, those pieces are hundredths. If I have 1,000 units, I have 1,000. If I take that unit and cut it into 1,000 pieces, each one of those pieces is a thousandth. If you have 10,000 units, you have a 10,000. If you cut a unit up into 10,000 pieces, you have a 10,000th. 100,000, 100,000th. A million, and a millionth. Now, in our lesson at school, many of you noticed something. You noticed that 10 and tenth, they're just opposite. 1, 0, 0, 1. And then you have the decimal point. There's 2 zeros in 100 after the unit. There's 2 zeros in 100th before the unit. 3 zeros after, 3 zeros before. This really means 0 units and 1/10. 0 units and 1/100th, and so on. So if we were to look at these, we have some special pieces. If you can see, we have these cubes, and we call these the decimal cubes. Now in Montessori, we've always assigned the same colors: green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, for units, tens, and hundreds, unit thousand, 10,000, 100,000, unit million, and so on and so forth. So because decimals are pieces of whole numbers, we've given them the same pattern of green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red. But we're now using lighter versions to show that they're not a 10, but a tenth. Not 100, but 100th. So we have a dark blue in a cube to represent a tenth. We have a dark pink. This represents 100th. We have a green for 1,000th. Here's 10,000ths. That's a lighter blue. It's still blue because it's still in the 10, but it's a 10,000th, not a tenth, but also not a 10 or a 10,000. We have a lighter pink to show 100,000th, and an even lighter green to show millionth. Now, we also have some cards that help us read the numbers. So I'm going to start here with 1/10. This card here says 1/10, and then this represents it. But now I don't have 1/10 anymore. I have 2/10. 3/10. 4/10. 5/10. 6/10. Oh, can't get this guy. 7/10. 8/10. And 9/10. And you might ask, how come there's no 10/10? Well, it still works like regular categories. When you have 10 in one category, you have to trade it in for one of the next bigger category. And it works the same with decimals. In fact, the hardest part of decimals will be reading them. Everything else follows a lot of the same rules for adding, subtracting, and multiplying and dividing. Really just understanding the categories, being able to read them and compare them. That's really the hardest part. So these are tenths. We would do the same thing for hundredths. We have cards for hundredths as well. Same for thousandths through here. What would you do if you had two categories at one time? This is where it really gets tricky. We're going to practice with these a little bit. Let's say I have a number like this. When I have two numbers, I always line up my decimal points. Now, if I build this, it says that I have 0 units and I have 3 tenths and 4 hundredths. So the trick to reading decimals is to remember that the decimal point says and. 0 and. If I look at this, I read it like a regular number, 34. And then I look at the category my number ends on, and that's the family name that I say. So this says 0 and 34 hundredths. What if I had something like this? How would I say this? So first I'll build it. How many numbers are in my tens category? I have 7. So I need to put 7 cubes. And how many is in my hundredths category? 2. So I have to get rid of some of these guys. So now to say this, I say 0 and 72 hundredths. This is a wonderful skill to practice. You can write numbers for yourself and practice saying them. When you're in school, you can use the decimal board, make them with the cards. Let's add another set of numbers. Let's look at thousandths. So for instance, this number, it says that I have 4 thousandths. Now, if you just have a number like this and you're not lucky enough to have the colored cards in front of you, you can also just count over the numbers. Just like you would say unit, 10, 100, 1,000, you can go unit, 10, 100, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So this is 4 thousandths. If I make it a little bit trickier, I can add some other digits. This says 0 and 704 thousandths. You just read it like a regular number, and then you say the last category. So this is a great place for us to stop and for you to practice. When you feel very confident reading numbers with tenths, hundredths, and thousandths, then we'll move on to another lesson.